Good evening. This Parsha, this Shabbos, is Parshas Beshalach, the fourth Sedra of Sefer Shemos. And I want to begin with, it was pointed out to me that I mentioned this Sipurna who held that there were crocodiles as part of the Eser Makos. And most hold that it was the Tzefardea, the frogs that were not frogs, according to him, that were actual crocodiles. I know that last week I kept saying about the Arbe because there is an opinion that it was the Arbe, but most hold that what the Sipurna is referring to is the Tzefardea. And I just wanted to put that up front before we began talking about this very luscious, colorful Sedra. In the upcoming week, we have Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. And as I've said to you on so many occasions, it's a turning point. But it goes from din to chesed, and it spirals, and it gives the power of Purim, Pesach, Pesach Sheni, and Shavuos, Kabbalas HaTorah, all coming from Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. And the Bnei Yisachar even talks about that a person should daven on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat for his esrig. Now, what does Chamisha Asar B'Shvat have to do with Sukkos and esrig, which is 8 months later? But we know that tzaddikim said that they were able to look at the esrig and to know the level of ruchnius, of spirituality, that they would attain the entire year from their esrig. That the esrig was the embodiment of the totality of the success of how much ruchnius would be achieved in that year, and how much avodas hakodesh, our spiritual dimension and service in making HaKadosh Baruch Hu happy. Because that really is the bottom line. That means when we do a mitzvah, we want that, of course, we want to do the right thing and the good thing. But we want, while we're doing it, that it brings us closer to our Kodesh Baruch Hu, because he is very happy with the fact that we are doing something for his sake, not for our own sake, for our own glory, for our own praise, for our own kavod, but we are really making him happy, which in turn, when a father is happy, he wants the children to be happy likewise. So we have a very important dimension for Chamisha Asar B'Shvat, and it brings us to the point most of the time Chamisha Asar B'Shvat falls out in the week after we laned, or on Shabbos itself. This year it's Sunday night, Monday, in the upcoming week after Shabbos. Why is it linked min hashamayim to Parshas Beshalach? But if you remember, one of the episodes in Parshas Beshalach was that the Yidden had no water to drink. and that the water was too bitter. And they took a drink of it, they couldn't put it into their mouths. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, take a tree and throw it into the water, vayimtiku hamoyim, and the water became sweet. Now, why was a tree chosen to make the water sweet? Why not take a rock or take a certain type of a bush? Why was it a tree? And Meforshim say, because ha'adam eitz hasoda, that a man is compared to a tree, that it is barren, we're born just regular babies, and what will become of that baby depends on its development and its nurturing and how much love is extended to this baby, and then it begins to sprout forth, to grow up, to be able to develop with all of its qualities and characteristics. And that really is what a tree is, and that's why Chazal say, Ki ha'adam eitz hasoda, that a tree is a simple thing, barren, and it's only later that it begins to flourish and exude in its dimension of fruitfulness and bear fruit, just as a human being bears fruit and has family and has children, has everything that it wants to have in life. So the tree was chosen for that reason, and it made the water sweet. Now, most trees do not have in its essence sweetness. That means we have certain fruits which are much sweeter than others. But trees, a barren tree, is really a parallel to a human being. And that's why, and don't forget, we don't celebrate fruits on Chamisha or B'Shvat. We celebrate and ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for delicious fruits on Shavuos. That's when we brought the Bikurim, all of the fruits, to the Kohen. But we celebrate the trees on Chamisha Asur B'Shvat. And therefore we make brachos on fruits because that's the result of the fruition of what happens with a tree. And that's why on Shavuos we decorate the shuls with leaves and plants, things that are tree-like. And on Chamisha Asur B'Shvat, we celebrate with the Shechiyanu and the Borei Peri Ha'etz of the actual fruits. Now, in its essence, the day is so filled, and on the surface, it looks like just another day. I mean, we don't say Tachnun. We wouldn't say if it fell out on Shabbos of Harachamim or Tzidkoscha by Mincha Shabbos. But on a weekday, you can ride, you can talk on the phone, you can write, you can do like a regular day. And that's because a tree, when we put the seeds into the ground, no one sees any fruitfulness. It looks, even when the tree starts to grow, it looks barren, it looks zero, no leaves, no fruit, nothing. And that is the essence of Chamisha Asur B'Shvat, that we are able to springboard the day into fruitful results in every aspect of our lives. And that's the reason that a person davens for an esrog, Not on Pesach, not on Shavuos, but he does it on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. Because as I said, Tzaddikim said they took a look at an esrog of a person, they knew if that year was going to be fruitful for his ruchnius or a failure. They were able to see it. So we have to rejoice on Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. And even though the snow, I'm speaking to you on Monday night after the snowfall and the freezing cold outside, so it looks like anything but flourishing fruits and trees and everything. But that's the essence of a Yid's Emunah, that we live through life with daily disappointments, and sometimes it's hard to pull through a day or to pull through a week or a month or a year. And we sometimes go into Rosh Hashanah with great disappointment. We look back at the year and it was not what we wanted it to be. But just like the tree, the hidden growth and the hidden flourishing of what its ability is able to do is inherent in it, and it's our Munah that brings it out to actual lemaisa, the actual action. Now, our Sedra begins with Vayehi Beshalach Paro es ha'am v'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz pelishtim ki karavu ki amar Elokim pen yinachem ha'am birosa milchama v'shavu mitzrayma. But the first word is Vayehi. And you know that Vayehi is only employed in a sad situation. Otherwise it says V'hoya, which means the same thing, but it's the happy side. And if it's a good event, you know, V'hoya bayom ahu yitoka shofar gadol, that when good things happen or will happen, we use the word V'hoya, not Vayehi. And our first word of our Sedra is Vayehi. I mean, wasn't this what Klal Yisrael was waiting for? For all of their 210 years that they were suffering Vayeyanchu B'nai Yisrael min ha'avoda. This was the time they were waiting for. But the Medrash says a few things. The Targum Yerushalmi says that the people were saddened because every family suffered losses. That means they were thrilled that they were finally leaving. But when they realized that their next door neighbor and their cousin down the road and others died, only 3 opinions, that 1 out of 5 survived and left Mitzrayim, and another opinion that it was only 1 out of 50, and a third opinion, 1 out of 500, that 499 died. Now this was during the days of darkness. You know, one of the plagues was Choshech. And as I told you previously, that it was darkness that you could actually feel, and that the Mitzrayim couldn't move in their place. It wasn't like us, that if we have a pitch black room, you could still walk around, you could talk, you could do. They couldn't do anything. And it was that the Yidden had Rachmanis on them and came to feed them and to give them water for the 3 days. But one of the reasons that it was so pitch black and that a Mitzri couldn't move, says the Medrash, because that's when the Jews who had to die, that they were not longing to leave Mitzrayim. They had gotten used to it. There was no problem. Yeah, they were being beaten down, but this was daily life. And they therefore were not zoicha to the Gula. And they died out in the 3 days, so that when the Jews were burying the people who died, the Mitzrayim wouldn't see all of the levayas, the funerals, because they were stuck in their place, in their chairs, in their beds, in their houses, wherever they were. So they didn't see anything that was going on. And for them, it wasn't even light. It was pure darkness. So the Jews died and they were buried then. But when it came to actually leaving, people felt, the Yidden felt bad, that there was such a loss, and there was a person they lived next to, their family, for 100 years. And now, Nebuch, they were not zoicha to leave. So that's why the Targum Yerushalmi says that the Lashon is employed vayehi, sadness. But we also know, and the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says, that those people who died, let's say a man, Nebuch, died, and he left over a wife with children, every person, the one, let's say, out of the 5 who lived, and the other 4 died, so the one who lived took care of the other 4 fathers who died, the children, because who, when they were going out of Mitzrayim, who was caring for the families? So many people died, so who was taking care? The direction and the influence and everything that had to take place, who was doing it? So the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says that the one who lived of the 5, he took care of those children. And he teaches it, Vachamushim olu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. In our pasuk, the word Vachamushim means armed, weaponry. But the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel says Vachamushim. And for those 5s, because the word Chamushim is like Chamisha, that for those 4 families who didn't get out of Mitzrayim, the husbands, the fathers, Olu b'nei Yisrael, that the b'nei Yisrael, the ones who did survive, brought up the b'nei Yisrael from Mitzrayim into the Exodus and to the Yetziah and to Kriyas Yamsuf, and they were hovered together with all the children and families, overseeing their own and overseeing those families who survived, but their fathers and the head of the family did not survive. Now, the Medrash says, translation of why the word Vayehi is employed, is because Vayehi is like saying, Oy vey. That's what the Medrash says. That Paro, when they were leaving Mitzrayim, he suddenly screamed out and said, Oy gewalt, what did I do? That I let the Jews go? Now, he really didn't have a choice, because we know that they were being beaten into the ground by all 10 of these Makkos. And the last one was so violent that there was fighting between Mitzri to Mitzri, because Paro was considering not letting them go. And they came and they started to fight, and there were Mitzrayim being killed left by Mitzrayim, by Egyptians. Because they said, what are you waiting for? Till every single one of us is dead? There's no household. Ein bayis asher ein sham mes. There is no household that doesn't have some dead body in it. So do you want that to happen to us and then you're going to finally let us go? So that is why, I mean, Paro really had no choice. But why did he cry out and say oy vey? Because the economic, strategical aspect of what it meant in dollars and cents, free labor by hundreds of thousands, doing his buildings, his sidewalks, his everything, free of charge. And that, the Medrash says, is why suddenly when they started to leave and he realized that this project, that project, and there's no one going to be here to do it. So he cried out, Vayehi, oy vey, and that's why the term, says the Medrash, is Vayehi and not Vahoya. Now, the Medrash brings a short story to illustrate this point. And the Medrash says that there was somebody in the middle of a field in a place that was barren, and he saw a strand of pearls. And he picked it up, and he figured like he had no use for it, and somebody was passing by, and he said to the person, would you like to have this strand? I don't know if this is toy or if this is real or what. And the person said, yeah, I'll take it. And they got to a little town and he opened up a booth and he had this strand of pearls. And the Medrash says somebody passed by and asked him, Hagadolim kama, how much do you want to sell me? Because he took the pearls off the strand and he was selling pearl by pearl. How much do you want for the big ones? So he answered and said, 1,000,000. Elif alofim, that sounds like 1,000,000. 1,000 times 1,000 is 1,000,000. And haketanim kama, meya, 100,000. And the medium-sized ones, 800,000. These are the words of the Medrash. I'm just telling it to you in English, but these are the numbers that the Medrash says. And while he was saying this to this man who was interested in buying the pearls, the man who found the strand and gave it to the guy who now opened up this booth passed by, and he heard the conversation. And he gave out a cry and said, what? This is what I just gave over like it was nothing? And that, the Medrash says, Hahu dechsev vayehi beshalach paro. That is a illustration of the feeling of Paro when the Yidden left, because he felt he lost so much money and so much economy was going to suffer by virtue of the fact that he gave away the strand. So the point being that we have to open up our eyes sometimes and realize what we have in our possession. Now, the pasuk says, "V'amar par," the Yidden left. "V'amar par levnei Yisrael nevuchem heim ba'aretz." Sogar aleim hamidbor. The Jews left, and the pasuk says that Paro said to the Bnei Yisrael, which the Kadmonim asked, what do you mean to the Bnei Yisrael? They left Mitzrayim. Who was he talking to? Who Bnei Yisrael? And the Targum Yonasan Ben Uziel says that this was Dasan and Aviram, if you remember, the two old troublemakers who stirred up trouble every turn of the way. Dasan was the one who went and snitched on Moshe Rabbeinu and said that kid that grew up in your palace is killing your people, who killed a Mitzri and that. And then we find replete in the Midbar that when they were traveling, every time there was trouble with something, that Yidden had a plague and thousands died out, who was the one who stirred up the trouble? For every event that happened, it was Dasan and Aviram. So the question is, if Paro was talking to them, and the Medrash says, yeah, they didn't leave with the Yidden, how did they get over to the Midbar, to the desert, over the water? So some say that there was Kriyas Yamsuf again for those two, which is like the most unbelievable thing, because these two were such Rishoyim. And how could they have gotten across the water without it splitting for them? So those Meforshim say, indeed they were Rishoyim, but the reason that it split for them again was because they were shoitrim, they were police for the Egyptians against their brethren, the Jews, and they were supposed to supervise. Did they produce enough of the bricks and all of the things they had to do? And if they didn't, they were supposed to beat the daylights out of them. And Dasan Aviram said, no, we're not going to pick up a hand against a fellow Jew. And they said, okay, then we're going to beat you. And they were beaten to a pulp, the Kadmonim say. That they were beaten up and they accepted it better than going to beat up another Jew. And in the schos of that pain and that suffering, not to beat up another Jew, they were zoicha that even though they didn't leave Mitzrayim with the Jews, that they got across the water and they lived to be in the Midbar with everybody else. Now, and as a matter of fact, on that story with the pearls, the Medrash is very dramatic, because it says that this guy that gave away the pearl, he tore his clothes, he was it was of some scene that took place there when he realized what he had given away. We shouldn't have to tear our clothes and tear our hair out of our head for having given up opportunities that we understand years later were golden chances for us to be able to thrive with. Now, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu, everyone was collecting the gold and the silver because HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them, I want you to take the gold and silver, and you could even tell them you're just borrowing it from them, which the Sfas Emes discusses why they said that and why they said, we're going out only for 3 days, but they never meant it because they planned to leave and to stay out. But having gone through what they went through and they were entitled to be paid, they were never paid a penny for the 210 years that they worked. So they were very justified to go get the gold and to get the silver and the avonim, all of the diamonds and the things that they possessed. So the pasuk says there was a promise made to Yosef that when Klal Yisrael will finally leave Mitzrayim, that his body, his bones, will be taken up with them to Eretz Yisrael. And indeed, he's buried in Shechem. He's buried in Nablus. That's the English name for Shechem. So there is an interesting question asked that the pasuk says, "Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo," and we find that the first time that Bilam was asked to come curse the Jews by Balak, that Hashem said to him, "Lo selech imohem," don't go with them. The next day when they came back and they glorified the offer and everything else, it says that Hashem said, you could go with them itchem. So there's imam, imohem, and there's itam, or itchem, with them. What's the difference? So the Meforshim explain, imohem means becoming part and parcel. With them, that means becoming like them, nurturing each other, attaching oneself to what they represent. But itchem only means that you're with them, but you're not part and parcel of how they behave and what they do. So by Bilam, the second day they came and offered him money. Come, and he's going to give. He never mentioned the first time he came, the shluchim of Bilam, anything about covet or money, and then it would have been pure curse. So Hashem didn't want that because it could have had an effect. But once there was these motives of money and covet, which he extended on the second day, Hashem said, oh, you have that negias, and you have that desire, and you have that hope for all of that personal gain. Now you can go with them because there's so much impurity in your intention. I'm not worried about it being successful in any which way. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to take Imo with him, because look what the richness and the life of Yosef produced and represented. He didn't want just a casket to be brought back to Israel. Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo. He wanted that the people, when they saw that Oren, that it should hit them like lightning. Everything that Yosef did and everything that Yosef lived, and how he was part and parcel, and not only that, but the backbone. It says that the Sar Shel Yam says, I'm not splitting. These guys served idols, and these guys, the Mitzrayim and the Jews. What do they deserve? I should do something chutz l'derech hateva and split for them. So hayom ra'a vayonos, that when the Yam saw the schusim of Yosef HaTzadik, who withstood thick and thin of all types of temptations and all types of difficulties to get through the day. You know, we say he was 12 years in prison. We say it in 1 second like nothing. Could you imagine it wasn't air-conditioned prisons that they had there? And that he was thrown in on falsehoods and charges. That the embodiment of his character was so sterling and so rare and remarkable above and beyond. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted. Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo, with him. Now, we know in this parsha is the parsha of Mon. And the Gemara says that when the Mon came down every day, it came down with jewels next to it. That means the Mon landed. And the Gemara says that the tzaddikim took the Mon and they took the jewels. And the average people, or the Rishoyim, they took the Mon, they had to live, that was the food, but they didn't take the jewels. And the Nakuda, it's discussed at length, but the one Nakuda that I want to underscore and share with you is the fact, why did the tzaddikim take? I mean, the Rishoyim knew that a diamond was a diamond. But the answer was that people who lead their lives trying always to hit the target of what their daily activities should be and what is the end result and the end goal for what we say and do, that it should be a nachas ruach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it should have the purpose of foresight. The tzaddikim, it says, took the jewels because they saw that there's going to be a time when they build a mishkan, they're going to need the jewels. The Rishonim could not care about tomorrow. They're within front of their eyes, what can I gain and do to maximize my personal benefit and maximize the pleasure and the goodness of this hour. I'm not worried what's going to be about in 10 weeks. And that, the Chazal say, differentiated the people who took the actual jewels and the people who did not take. The word was foresight. And because of their foresight, they were able to build a mishkan and have everything that was required, just like Yaakov Avinu planted our rozim, cedar trees, and we needed cedar trees for the mishkan. And he knew that we were going to need it. So when he told them, he planted, they grew, and that when you're going to leave, take the cedar tree. They cut down the cedar trees, and they took it with them when they left Mitzrayim to be able to have the necessary materials that they would need in a mishkan. Now, when it came to the Mon, the reason that it was called Mon, the pasuk says, Ki lo yoda mahu. The word Mon is like, what is it? And therefore they called it the what is it food, because they never saw anything like it. This was a food that you didn't need any preparation, no baking, no cooking. You didn't even have to go, excuse me, to the washroom. There was nothing that had to be disposed of. It was the purest of food that you could ever want, and whatever you thought about, that is what it tasted like. But the Choiza of Lublin, the Choiza who was a Talmud of the Mizritcher Maggid, and a good friend of the Balatanya and Reb Mendele Rimanov and the Koznitzer Maggid and that whole Chevraya. He was a very good friend of the Choiza. And why was he called Choiza? Because his Rebbe, the Noam Elimelech, left him over a gift to be able to see. And the word Choiza means to see. That he sat here and he saw what was doing with a Jew 3,000 miles away if he was in trouble, whatever, and he was pulling him out of the trouble. The Choiza said that it was such a ruchniya, spiritual food, the man, that when a person ate it, he refined and he reactivated the powers of Lamala Min HaTeva spirituality completely. And that's why the pasuk says, they called it man, ki lo yoda mahu. It's referring to the person, his next door neighbor, that when he saw him in the morning, he looked one way, and in the afternoon, he looked like a different person completely. And that is drawn down by a parallel to every mitzvah that we do. That when a person does a mitzvah with love and with a fear and with a reverence, it saturates and drenches his neshama to such a point that the person is going through a process of refinement and becoming not just in madrega better, but in the essence of his character and the essence of who he absolutely is. And that's why we found that such tzaddikim, rebbes or Rosh Yeshiva, that they had aspects to their life and they lived to the 90s and they didn't take vacations and they didn't have any gashmias, but they seemed permeated with such simcha and with such happiness that they were glowing with the luster of simcha all of their lives. And when people went in for a yechidus, went in to be with the tzaddik or the rov, and was encompassed within the atmosphere of his room, they felt elevation. They felt truly elevated. And I know many stories of people who had never gone into tzaddik X or tzaddik Y, and they went in, they came out, they were like transformed almost. They said it had such impact, such a dimension of elevation that they couldn't believe it themselves. Now, the Sipurna says that in this story of Mon, the pasuk says, "Lema'an anasenu," that I want to test you. Now, what was the test? They didn't have to bake, they didn't have to cook, it tasted terrific. What was the test? It was a test of having wealth. Because many people the first day would be shocked and appreciative and beyond words. But on the 100th day, they would already be getting used to what they had and what they saw and what they experienced. And then the haughtiness and other negative dimensions seep in. I mean, I have all of this money. The guy next door to me can't even afford a car more than once every 15 years. And the ego and the snottiness and the snobbery, all of that sets in. And that's what the Sipurna says, that the word, Laman Anasenu, that I'm giving you the money in order to test you. Test them? Yes. Because easy go, easy does it, produces exceptional goodness with the opportunity, let's say, of being wealthy, but it could at the very same time sharpen the daggers of disappointment and drag down the person in his behavior. Now, we know that tonight and tomorrow, says Reb Mendel Ariminov, that there is a tremendous segula, an opportunity if people are having a struggle with parnasa, with livelihood, or they're not struggling, but they want better, improved, increased livelihood. There's one day a year, which is Yom Shlishi, which is tomorrow, the Tuesday of Parshas Beshalach, the upcoming Parsha, not that you laned it and it's the third day after. It's the third day before, on Yom Shlishi, to read in Beshalach from Chamishi to Shavi'i, twice the Mikra, the Psukim, and once the Targum. So says Reb Mendel Ariminov, and every Sforim store has a booklet for what Reb Mendel Ariminov said, that a Yid comes in and says, do you have the pamphlet with Chamishi to Shavi'i of what Reb Mendel Ariminov said about the Parshas Hamon, to read it on the third day of the week, which is Tuesday, of Parshas Beshalach. So I wanted to mention it to you. There may be someone out there who never heard of it, or there may be someone who heard of it and just really doesn't get around to doing it, not to lose the opportunity. Reb Mendel Ariminov was the one that the Noam Elimelech said he was giving over his koyach hamoyach, which was his most valued possession, as a Yerusha to Reb Mendel Ariminov just before he was nifter. So Reb Mendel Ariminov was no small fry, let's say it that way, that he was a big, big, big tzaddik, and he was able to predict that somebody could wrap himself in this Parshas Hamon and be able to bring him way, way up in his Tzorchei Parnasa. Now we know that we learn out from, in this Parsha, you have Oz Yashir, and we learn out from Oz Yashir that his Snoya Lefonai B'mitzvahs, that when we have a talis bag, that one costs $100 and one costs $80, And the 80 is nice, it's brand new, but it's no comparison to the beauty of the $100 one. We're supposed to take it buy the better one. Now, of course, we're talking about limitations. Not everyone could afford this or afford that. But in cases where there's a choice to be made and both are affordable, that we're supposed to pick the nicer one because it says Zek Keli Vanveyu, and that's a pasuk in Oz Yashir of this. So the Meforshim and the Gemara ask, why is it that we learn out to do the mitzvahs in a nicer way with nicer things, and the more expensive is within our reach? It doesn't mean that a person has to go mortgage his house or do who knows what, but it's within his reach, and he should take the nicer one. And where do we know it from? From Zakeli Vanveyu, a pasuk in Oz Yoshir, when they were leaving Mitzrayim. Now, the Gemara answers, or the Meforshim answer, we learn it from there because that was HaKadosh Baruch Hu took out the Yidden. That should have been enough. They wanted to get out and stop all the servitude and all of the enslavement, that just take them out. But he didn't do that. He took them out and he made sure that when they walked over the Yam, that normally in a lake or in a river, the bottom is like mud. I mean, it's earth, which has been saturated with water. And when you put water into that, it's mud. But he had for them cemented sidewalks that they walked, that they didn't have to dirty their shoes. And there's a whole list of 10 things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did it. But he didn't have to do it. Believe me, if they were leaving and they saw they got across the Yam and they would have had mud on their shoes, they would have been very happy that at least they lived to get out and to be saved. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu went the extra mile with a whole list of things to make them comfortable and to make them feel on top of the world. So it's rightfully learnt out from that when we do a mitzvah, we have to go out of our way to do it in the nicest, presentable, proper fashion, that within our means we are able to afford the beauty and dignity of bringing out everything about that mitzvah. Now, I want to say to you that when the Yidden were in the Midbar, they were busy complaining. And if they would have thought back to the 10 plagues, the Eser Makos, and the Nisim v'Neflaos that happened when they walked across the water of the Yam Suf, they would have been dancing every day. But there were lots of complaints. And Rabbaran Belzer, Zecher Tzadik v'Kodosh Livrocha, Zachusa Yogein Aleinu, right after the Holocaust, he had probably hundreds of survivors who were so thin and emaciated that they barely had any skin, they had any fat, anything to their bodies. But he made a Shabbos for them. And at the Seudah, he began singing Shabbos Zmiras, and no one was singing. So he stopped and he asked, why don't you join me in the Zmiras? So somebody said to him, Rebbe, you mean well, but I just lost all my brothers. I lost my Zayda. I lost my Baba. I lost my parents. How should we who just got out of that Gehenna sit here and sing Zmiras? To which Rabbi answered and said, in Parshas Beshalach, we have Oz Yoshir. And the Gemara learns out Tchias HaMesim from Oz Yoshir, because it says Oz Yoshir, that we will sing in the future tense. It doesn't say sure that they were singing, but they will sing in the future, and from that the Gemara learns that Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead, will happen, and we know it from the Torah, from the word Yosher, that they're going to sing. So it's with the emunah of the glorious times that will be, they were able then to sing, because they also lost their relatives, and they lost their neighbors, and they lost their kroivim. And now it was Oz Yosher Moshe that they were busy singing. So how were they able to sing? Because they had the statement of Tchias HaMesim with them. And after his speech, and warmly and sensitively talked about Tchias HaMesim, and that which we learned from Oz Yosher, from the word Yosher, that it's min HaTorah, it rejuvenated the people there, and in unison they began singing the Shabbos Zmiras. And I lastly want to share with you a question that's asked, why is it that no woman ended up, they got out of Mitzrayim, they came to Har Sinai, and 40 days later, they went and they served the Egel, and it wasn't Avodah Zorah, as the Ramban says, it was they wanted just leadership to communicate. But the men, the Medrash says, fought with the women to get their jewelry, get their gold, and they couldn't do it. The women were fierce not to participate and not to have anything done or to do with this Egel. Not one woman. And the Meforshim are all like astounded. How could it be that there wasn't one woman, one, that would participate like these men, the 3,000 that immediately participated and paid with their lives subsequently? So they answer and say, because when the men went out and sang Oz Yoshir, it was without any music. And right after Oz Yoshir, that all the men said, Vatikach Miriam achos Moshe es hatov biyoda, she took the instruments and the women sang. And a shira with simcha is eina doime to a shira without simcha. Yes, Oz Yoshir was gewaltig, but it wasn't with the level of simcha and with music like the women did. And the schus of the level that they came out then, they couldn't come near an egel. So say tzaddikim. Beautiful vort, beautiful vort. And that's why no woman participated in the egel. So the Eibush is a helpful, it's Shabbos Shira, we call it, We put out buckwheat kasha for the birds outside as a minig because of the Shiras Hayam going over the sea, and which was Nisim v'Niflaos, and it says that even Oz Yoshir, that whole tefillah, we incorporated into all of the davening, meaning every Shabbos, every Yom Tov, every day. There's no day, 365 days here, that we don't say Oz Yoshir, because incorporated into it and interwoven into the essence and the Kabbalah and the secrets of those words and letters provide a flow of tremendous goodness for a Yid, and that's why the Anshe Knesset Agdola made sure to put it in, and we have to say it each and every day of our lives. And we should be able to be zoicha like the Mon and to the Shiras Hayam and to all the Nisim v'Niflaos lemala min hateva.